Making news this week, Perth shutdowns to interrupt football goers on the busiest sporting weekend of July.
The political fight for fauna. We talked to the Animal Justice Party's Katrina about their policies and being the #1 candidate.
You've heard of the International Man of Mystery, now meet Hong Kong's International Man of Opulence.
And the Snowden saga continues as the NSA whistleblower is finally granted asylum.
This is the evening news with Leung Danielle Staniskov.
We begin tonight in a slightly abstract fashion. From today, we undertake a new effort to bring you more central unbiased program that brings you the best stories from around Perth and the globe.
To those who aren't fond of change, fear not, as we'll still be bringing you the same reliable news that you've come to know and love from the people that you trust.
We'll begin our news coverage tonight with a rundown of the latest Roy Morgan polls. And the return of Kevin Rudd to the Labour Party's leadership has sparked a comeback as electors voiced their concerns over the political ducking of Tony Abbott. Roy Morgan has the Labour Party in prime position to win the election, with 54.5% of the two-party preferred to the coalition's 45.5%. The ALP's leads in primary votes, also with 41.5% of the votes compared to 39.5% for the coalition. Support for independence is down 1% to 10.5%, including the support for the Qatar Australia Party and the Palmer United Party, who provides 1.5% each to that figure. If you're a Green supporter, it's good reading for them after a tumultuous week in which it has been suggested that they may lose the seat of Melbourne. They've stayed steady at 8.5% of the vote.
The Perth City Link checks off another milestone this weekend as power is rerouted to the new sunken Fremantle Line tunnel. However, as the construction of the project enters its final year, the Central Perth train station will be forced to close this weekend before a second final closure between the 31st of July and the 4th of August. Christian Dwyer has more.
Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 6 months, you will no doubt have seen Perth's ambitious City Link project and its centrepiece, the redesign of the Perth station and the sinking of the Fremantle line. When asked just how much the shutdowns would affect this weekend's Western Derby, Mr Buswell believed his government had enacted the best strategy that it could in the situation.
We've been working very hard over the last while to make sure that the public fully understand what is happening and are fully aware of the need to plan for change. And anyone who's suggesting that the government and the contractors haven't done enough in relation to communicating that message to the public, I think is being misleading in the extreme.
The state opposition responded angrily to government claims that adequate announcements had been made to the public regarding the shutdowns and suggested that perhaps more could be done. Deputy Leader of the Opposition Roger Cook, himself a commuter on the Southern Suburbs rail line, questioned the cost of the shutdowns media campaign in juxtaposition to the taxpayer-funded See the Bigger Picture campaign in the last election.
Well, the Bigger Picture campaign was a very expensive advertising campaign paid for by the WA taxpayer to talk about all the good news that the government think is going on in the infrastructure system. You would have thought that they could set a bit of money aside to do an advertising campaign to explain to the people of Perth just how they get around these disruptions that will occur as a result of the rail closures.
Lollipop sign holders have been employed to get the masses' attention to the changes in the lead up to the Derby and will do so till the end of the week to avoid significant commuter chaos. And Mr Buswell's tip for how the weekend will play out?
Well, as a long-term Eagles supporter, of course, I'll be supporting the Eagles. I expect they'll get over the line, but I reckon it'll be by less than 2 goals.
Christian Dwyer, WAMN News.
Tonight we begin our exclusive series on the minority parties within Australia in the lead up to the federal election with the Animal Justice Party. I was joined earlier this week by Animal Justice Party member and #1 Senate candidate for the party in Western Australia, Katrina Love. Katrina Love, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
What is the Animal Justice Party about?
Well, in government in Australia, nearly all legislation is made and has an effect on human beings. The people are governed by the people. So what the Animal Justice Party wanted to do was to have a voice in the political system in Australia. Most legislation that passes in Australia has either directly or indirectly an effect on animals. 80% of legislation, our President believes. So we have so many voters in Australia who have a voice and who can make a choice come election time, and that's 23 million people, but the hundreds of millions or even billions of animals just in Australia alone that are affected by policies made by government don't have a voice and therefore can't have a say in the outcome that those legislations and laws have on them.
Given the chance of big political parties, it's not going to be easy to get into the Senate. Are you optimistic?
We have candidates running in New South Wales, ACT, South Australia, Victoria and WA. I think we're confident of getting at least one person into the Senate in one of those states.
Apart from animal rights, are there any other policies that your party is pushing as well?
All our policies regard animals. So we have opinions, of course, on social issues, on public transport, asylum seekers, equal marriage. We have opinions on that, but they don't form part of our policies unless they have an effect on non-human animals in Australia.
How is the party going to campaign? Is it going to be online campaign or some other methods?
Because we're a relatively new party, we were formed in 2009, so we haven't been going long. We don't have, of course, the backers and the donors and the large member base that the larger parties have. We're very restricted in our funds. So for a large part, it will be done through social media, through Facebook, through Twitter, and through our website.
Katrina, love, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
Still on politics now, whether you're a university student or a graduate, you're bound to have heard of the word Gonski. This week, Tasmania was the latest state to get on board with the Gonski plan to improve education. And to talk to us more about the progress of Gonski, I'm joined in the studio by political correspondent Martin Wilson. Good evening, Martin. Now, Marty, for our viewers who perhaps don't know what Gonski is all about, tell us a bit more about this education reform.
Thank you, Ivan. The Gonski reform was set up in 2010 by the federal government, forming an expert panel headed by the respected business leader David Gonski. They produced the most comprehensive review of the way schools in Australia are funded in almost 40 years, actually. The Gonski review examined the adequacy of the way schools are funded and what is needed to be changed, so that Australia's schools are among the best in the world in terms of quality and equity.
What will happen if additional fundings and changes recommended by Gonski are not delivered?
Well, the review makes it clear that the cost of inaction for students and our country will be significant. The lack of resources will continue to hold back too many students and make it harder for them to secure well-paid jobs in the future. The economic and social cost of our country of failing to uplift student performance and help students overcome disadvantage will be significant. The Federal Department of Education released an analysis that found that if we retain the status quo and fail to act on Gonski, $5.4 billion in funding would be lost to Australian schools over the next 4 years.
Now, Martin, you are left-leaning conservative in your own beliefs, and yet you have a very interesting view on the Gonski reform, and perhaps aren't shared by the Liberal Party. What are they?
I see there is an urgent need for change. Australia is investing far too little in its schools, and the way the money is distributed is not effective, efficient, neither is it fair. The current system is failing too many students who are missing out, whether they're due to socio-economic background or just the school is not funded appropriately. And though Australia remains a high-achieving nation, students' performance has declined in the last decade. And for example, 1 in 7 15-year-olds lack basic reading skills. I believe failure to act will cost not only our children but also our future country.
Some argument that this reform policy, amongst the others, have been toxic for Labor Party, and given the leadership change, do you feel the policy will continue to grow under Rudd's control?
Well, Tasmania has since accepted the reforms since Rudd's takeover. It's a Labor policy, not necessarily Rudd's policy. The policy was based on actual report findings. For them to do any different, would require a more expensive secondary report. So it's not really worth it.
What states have signed up to Gonski reform?
Currently, there's New South Wales has signed up, South Australia also. Queensland and West Australia, the Liberals have outright rejected it. Victoria and Tasmania are also in the talks.
And finally, in regards to Tasmania, what deal have they achieved with Gonski reform and what does it mean for them?
Well, as Tasmania is the most recent state to sign up, they have been fortunate to secure $400 million in funding for this 6-year period to be implemented which has been reserved $230 million for the public schools, $110 million for Catholic schools, excuse me, and $16 million for independent schools. It is important that all states and territory governments get on board by July 14 to ensure that our kids don't miss out.
Martin Wilson, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ivan.
Overseas now, everyone is partial to a bit of greed every now and then, but in Hong Kong, one man has proved his opulence is without limits. Tony Chan, a feng shui practitioner, siphoned millions of dollars from his dying client. A Hong Kong affiliate's YTV filed this report.
Tony Chan, the feng shui master who counterfeited local multi-billionaire Nina Gong's will, was sentenced to jail for 12 years. Tony Chan's representing lawyers pleaded to the juries and the judge for less serious punishments. Yet the judge, Andrew Colin McCare, was not pleased with these reasons. He denounced Chan as evil, greedy, and shameless. Judge McCare blamed Chan for taking the advantage of Nina Gong's weakness and lonesome to bilk Gong's multi-billion-dollar inheritance, showing Chan a smart imposter. Chan was arrested for counterfeit and using counterfeit documents back in 2010. The investigation and the lawsuit took more than 3 years and 5 months to finally come to a conclusion. Dustin Low, WMN News.
Staying in Hong Kong, People Power this week protested the expansion of the Tuen Mun Lanfills. Even members of the legislative councils had their say on the controversial construction. Dustin Low has the latest.
People Power held a protest by bikes in Tuen Mun yesterday afternoon against the plan of extending Tuen Mun Landfill. The participants were mainly from People Power and a Facebook group called Tuen Mun People Tuen Mun Events. They rode bicycles from Sun Tuen Mun Centre to the local DAB office as they claimed that DAB lied on citizens concerning the landfill plan, and they were angry about it. Albert Chen, a LegCo member from People Power, stated that local citizens were irritated because the government scrapped the plan of extending Cheung Kwan O landfill only due to the disagreements of people in that district. Dustin Low, YTV News.
In a story with as many twists and turns as a James Bond film, former NSA contractor Edward Snowden may have just secured his ticket to freedom out of Russia. South American country Venezuela have come to the aid of the American after the US withdrew his visa, although perhaps there could have been another option waiting outside his Russian airport prison. Shibs has more.
Latest reports suggest that fugitive whistleblower Edward Snowden, currently hiding within the transit zone of Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport, has agreed to accept political asylum in Venezuela. Venezuela was reportedly one of 3 Latin countries considering Mr. Snowden's request for asylum. Many Latin American countries were outraged when Bolivian President Evo Morales' plane was denied airspace access to several European countries on his way home from Moscow last week because of suspicions that Mr. Snowden was on board. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had earlier said that the US had no moral authority to arrest Snowden after revealing what he called US crimes against humanity. He also said that Mr. Snowden was being persecuted by the empire and urged him to come here. Early in July, US federal prosecutors have charged Snowden with espionage and theft of government property. These documents released by Snowden revealed that the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia and France have been spying on domestic and international communications on a much larger scale than previously thought. These documents also prove that they have been spying on their citizens, which proves to be the biggest bone of discontent. In another dramatic twist to the story, ex-Russian spy Anna Chapman kindly offered Snowden a way out of his political limbo by publicly offering to marry him. That way he can legally remain in Russia. The shapely redhead with curves to die for tweeted last week,
Snowden, will you marry me?
When asked by the Wall Street Journal if she was serious, she responded,
You're welcome to use your imagination.
However, a stumbling block still remains. In order for Snowden to get married, he would need documents like his passport, which the US has revoked. Perhaps Mr. Snowden could convince Ms. Chapman to follow him to a romantic Venezuelan getaway. Shibs Way, WMN News.
And that's how the world looks tonight. We'll have updates on our website and our YouTube channel.
We'll leave you tonight with footage of Treasurer Troy Boswell releasing Mulloway into Swan River as part of the government's commitments to recreational fishing. Good night.
Good night.